All right, so with the holidays over, it really made me realize one thing. You know, you can spend a lot of time online, and there's a lot of red pill based, well informed individuals, and you think, wow, this information is really getting around. And then you get around a bunch of normal people, family that just watch TV, and you realize, wow, like the Matrix is really, really robust. Like the blue pill, there's people that are absolutely lost. There's like, where do you start? Because it almost seems like there's nothing that can be done that is going to help wake people up. And even, you know, you look at what I'm talking about here is the self-destruction of the left. Take, for example, we had gun control. We gotta. It's a form of incrementalism, a confiscation eventually, in doing away with the Second Amendment right to bear arms. But they had this common sense gun control, and a lot of people on the left got behind it because they think they're going to get invited on the Stephen Colbert show someday. And it's like, well, what do we do if there's a problem? It's like, you dial 911. Those folks, those cops, those are some good men. They're gonna be there in 4 or 5 minutes to save your life. Only the official approved law enforcement should have access to these sort of tools. And there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, well, okay, there is some goofy people out there, and it is scary to think of them having firearms. And then the left comes along and they say, we need to defund the police because of the system. The system is biased. The system is bigoted. Get rid of those cops. We're going to have mental health counselors stop bank robberies and, drugged up lunatics robbing old ladies. We just need to give them some therapy on the spot. You're like, whoa, and they lost people there, but there's plenty of people that it really was just kind of goes right through them. They only see the mainstream reporting, or they see the articles that say something like defund the police doesn't actually mean defund the police. It just means reimagining law enforcement. When in truth, it means defund the police. We've seen here in Seattle where they defunded the police by 18%. And we just had like another 33 officers or something quit. It's falling apart. And predictably, crime is skyrocketing. And then, of course, we had the riots. The riots where there seemed to be no consequences for looting, burning, assault, whatever they felt like doing, all the way to establishing autonomous zones, founding of new countries. Which, by the way, communist countries that were quickly starving and taken over by a warlord within 48 hours. But all the implications of that series of events aside, it seems like you couldn't come up with a better recipe of policy for complete, utter annihilation and self-destruction. It makes no sense. And yet I think, and I want to share with you this guy's blog called Bruce Charlton. He's got some really provocative ideas. I like reading them. And he explains the stages of evil, or the 3 manifestations of evil, or however you want to classify it. And I think these are very useful tools because they give us methods of categorizing what it is we're seeing. And when you can see the natural progression, you can see what's going on, and that it's not total nonsense, or if it is nonsense, there's a purpose behind it. And having that understanding then gives you the ability to push back. So here we are on Bruce Charlton's notions. He says, since the millennium, we have entered the era of domination by Sorath, who is consuming Ahriman, as Ahriman consumed Lucifer. Now, I assume you're familiar with the idea of Lucifer. Ahriman is the Persian devil before the rise of Islam, and then he'll get into the demon Sorath here. But he says, my idea here is that the Ahrimanic impulse, which is evil in its cold, rational, systematic manifestation, has over the past couple of centuries consumed the more traditional Luciferic, devilish, evil of short-termist personal lust, pleasure, and torment, and is now being consumed in his turn by Sorath. So the archetypal Ahrimanic evil is epitomized by a manipulative bureaucrat who presides over a state or corporate psyops, prison, death machine, while Luciferic evil would be characterized by proximate evil, for example, those who personally beat, rape, and torture helpless prisoners. The final turning point of the Ahrimanic consumption of Lucifer was when the Luciferic revival of the 1960s sex, drugs, and rock and roll was captured by the state bureaucracy, leading to a pervasive and intrusive system of monitoring and control for political correctness. Modern leaders are primarily Ahrimanic and often anonymous, hidden, personally timid, like Obama, while old-style leaders were often Luciferic gangsters and pirates who cultivated a reputation for recklessness and the enjoyment of inflicting cruelty. Think of like a Genghis Khan. Luciferic evil now operates at a low level in the system among the mooks, minions, and henchmen, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, while the ruling architects of evil here have an Ahrimanic nature. The Luciferic values were condensed and operationalized into systemic and materialist form. Their spontaneity and pleasure were drained away. Free love and open-ended promiscuity became compulsory sensitivity training and the threat of harassment prosecutions. Spontaneity of turn on, tune in, drop out was incrementally, that's an important word, incrementally transformed into a world of proliferating committees, laws, guidelines, and procedures, checklists, forms, and feedback. Keep in mind the incrementalism of evil. That's very important because people love to hide behind slippery slope as a logical fallacy. Well, incrementalism is standard operating procedure. So he continues, from about 2000, there was a further move towards the purest, most absolutely negative form of evil, which could be named Seraphic, adopting this from Rudolf Steiner's identification of Sorath as the most extremely evil of beings. Seraphic evil is neither about pleasure nor about control. It tends towards the purely destructive. Luciferic evil is motivated by short-termist pleasure, while Ahrimanic evil is motivated by God denial, spiritual blindness, and reductionism towards a meaningless world of mechanical procedures. Then the Seraphic impulse is driven by negative impulses, primarily fear, resentment, and hatred. We see a lot of resentment, blame, people that want to fall into that style of thinking. Seraphic evil will therefore tend to destroy both the lustful pleasures of Luciferic evil and the complex functional bureaucracies of Ahrimanic evil. This is the Seraphic world we inhabit in 2020. A world in which the Luciferic lusts of sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle are forbidden and punished, and also a world in which the global system is being disabled and destroyed, even as its Ahrimanic architects have successfully accomplished a silent global coup and are trying to perfect it into the grandiose schemes of the Great Reset Agenda 2030. Look at all the resistance and pushback to Bill Gates. In 2020, we observe all the modern institutions, corporations, and every kind of bureaucracy as rapidly declining in efficiency and effectiveness under pressure from an ever-increasing culture of fear, victimology, entitlement, and resentment. Well said. That victim card is so destructive to the individual. You start with blaming other people. White privilege. Well, what if you're black and you think the system is racist and there's white privilege? Well, you certainly can't have any white friends, and you can't go get a job because that system is going to discriminate against you. So it narrows down your world till you can only be with like-minded, angry, likely poor. You surround yourself with poor failures. What do you become? And this he explains further here. Sorath divides mankind into more and more, smaller and smaller, self-identified victim groups, each resentful of and pitted against each other. BLM, Antifa, we see this. They try to, the word I've heard is atomization. They are trying to atomize us. No family, no Christmas, no religious gatherings, no sort of identification with anything but one atomized, weak individual. Because as an individual, you are weak. It's the parable of the sticks. The aim is eventually for each person to feel alone, consumed by feelings of thwarted entitlement. See this? Those programmed illusions. They're designed to create these feelings. And hatred of the world, and living in permanent fear of a whole world of other people, each of who resents and hates the solo victim just as he hates them. What did I say in that video on programmed illusions? The point is to create division. And then eventually, Sorath's intent is that everyone, without exception, should die in fear and despair. That's why it's so important to push against despair. Thus we see that Sorath takes Lucifer and Ahrimanic and pits the one against the other to weaken and destroy both. Whatever gives pleasure is thwarted. Whatever has been created and is complex or functional is reduced to chaos. Chaos is indeed the key term. Ultimately, Sorath is driven by resentment directed against God and all of his works, and resentment of man as a loving, creating being and all of his works. Sorath wants to reduce creation back to a primal state of chaos. We see this with the burn it all down, destroy the system, tear it down, it's too corrupt, get rid of it all, the anarchy. And then when all else has been destroyed, to destroy himself as an act of spite against the God who created him. Such is Sorath's fantasy, and he says, note, J.R.R. Tolkien depicted Sorath in his Silmarillion Legendarium under the name Morgoth, and I've talked about this before. You would see Morgoth then being the self-destructive urge, Sauron being like the communist dictator, and then your Witch King, which would be your self-indulgent, greedy character. And so Tolkien had a very excellent understanding of the nature of evil as well. And so take a real obvious example of this, and let's look at what platform we're on. YouTube. Well, unless you're watching this on BitChute, which I have a BitChute now for this reason. YouTube started, I would say, probably with fairly good intentions, the shared, free-flowing ideas. And there was some Luciferic evil, right? There was the bum fights, which is a big thing, which was just kind of this dirty little high you got by watching poor people beat each other up. And that was YouTube. Well, then they got into from the Luciferic evil to the Ahrimanic evil, and they got progressively more organized. The election of Trump made them realize how powerful free and independent voices had become, so they had to start getting rid of people. And look at how that's working out. You know, they've got the AI. There's certain names you can't say. Rand Paul found this out. There's certain topics you can't discuss anymore. And either it's an AI or it's a system of review or reporting on one another to get videos banned, certain things taken down, or just doing away with those that are effective communicators. But the Ahrimanic evil gets frustrated, and it gets frustrated by reality. Can you imagine trying to dominate and control everything? And this is going to be the ultimate downfall of the globalists. I think they've realized this. You can't. Even on YouTube, so they banned Stefan Molyneux. I've seen at least one channel that's been created to try and re-upload his content onto YouTube, which they've since banned. It was Molyneux Resurrected, and the same with like Owen Benjamin. There's been like 3 or 4 separate accounts trying to get his material up. So as everybody gets banned, it's like trying to plug the holes in a leaky vessel. As people get banned, those people try to sneak back on. And so more and more energy is just spent keeping the people off that you've tried to kick off, say like Alex Jones. And what they're finding is the Ahrimanic, the cold organizational managerial class, they can't do it. And so what begins to happen? What happens when your goals and your grand plans are just frustrated time and time again? You know, even as they push people off, they do go to BitChute. And there's the exact same people. I can go watch everybody that's been kicked off. I can go watch their stuff with a click of a mouse. Well, then the Sorath takes over. The Seraphic ideas, the self-destruction, they themselves give in to despair. It's if I can't rule it, if I can't control it, if it isn't my ideas that rule the day, then I'm going to burn it all down. Rather than seek truth, I will become self-destructive. And so what's YouTube doing? They're turning themselves into television. The very thing that drove people to YouTube was that it wasn't television. And so they are committing this seppuku. They're just saying, well, forget it. We'll become TV, and then everyone will leave YouTube, and all the interesting people will go elsewhere. And so in a grander sense, on a macro scale, why has the left become so self-destructive? Well, the final death blow to leftist ideology actually landed in the early 90s when it was revealed for all and sundry to see that the USSR was a failure, that top-down, programmed and planned economies don't work. And there'd been entire cultural movements, there'd been entire intellectual movements, there'd been whole social movements founded around this idea that we can top down and manage and come together and have a better world for the greater good, which is one of the most dangerous phrases in all of human existence. And so they tried to manage it anyway. They didn't want to let go of their ideas, their view, and so they became ever more restrictive. This is why censorship is so big, and it's like, oh, this person or this idea is contradicting the world we want to be, and so it became trying to create reality by the information they allowed to get out, but reality just is what it is. And as these globalists, as these elite, as those with money and power are beginning to realize we can't control it, our ideas were proven wrong, there's no way around it, they turn to self-destruction. They turn to burn it all down, tearing everything down, which is the worst idea in the world. Logically, I give the example of the tornado in the junkyard. Nobody builds a junkyard in Tornado Alley hoping to get a functional 747 with the next tornado that rips through. You don't get extraordinarily well designed, engineered, operating, say, societies or cultures through just random chaos. Random chaos logically knows that all you're going to get from chaos is just destruction. And so the left has become so self-destructive because they're simply at the stage of despair. Most urban areas are completely out of food and starving between 48 and 72 hours if supply lines break down. And of course, it will be the very urbanites that keep voting for Democrats that are the first to go hungry. And in a way, they know this, and they seek their own self-destruction because they can't face the reality, because of their pride, that their own ideas are faulty. And so to end on a more positive note, well, how do you deal with this? Well, I keep talking about, say, the recovery from any addiction. It relies on self-deception, on denial. Look at the 7 stages of grief, or 5, or depending on what you can consult. One of the big ones is denial. What you need to get to is acceptance. Well, the first step is to start speaking truth. It's like in AA. Your first step is to say, hi, my name is Bob, and I'm an alcoholic, and you may be the first truth that some of these addicts have spoken in 10 or 20 years. And then you don't fall for these divisive tactics, these programmed illusions. It's fellowship, it's community, it's family, these unifying aspects among people. It is a coming together, but it's a voluntary coming together. It's not top-down, state-driven, forced associations. And we show by speaking truth and not giving it into despair, there is a better life, there is a better world, there isn't the utopia that the Ahrimanic Evil dangles out in front of people, and it's like, if you just riot and burn, and we'll get there through a top-down organized system. It's like, if you take individual responsibility for your life, instead of just hoping and voting for some big government mommy and daddy to do it for you, you do actually find yourself then in the best possible world.